Welcome, the Lord's chosen. When a group turns against you, it's rarely because you're wrong, it's because you're no longer controllable. That single truth explains more betrayals, quiet attacks, and coordinated jealousy than most people will admit. Because envy doesn't announce itself with honesty. It organizes, it whispers, it forms committees behind smiles. And the moment you become difficult to predict, difficult to replace, or difficult to pressure, something interesting happens. The same people who once tolerated you start watching you very closely. Here's a fact most people don't like hearing. Studies in organizational psychology show that groups driven by shared resentment are far more likely to self-destruct than groups driven by shared purpose. Not because they lack intelligence, but because resentment requires constant emotional maintenance. Someone has to keep the anger alive. Someone has to keep the story straight. And someone always slips. That's not karma, that's math. What makes this situation even more ironic, and slightly funny if you're paying attention, is that jealous groups almost always believe they're the smartest people in the room. They confuse volume with strategy and numbers with power. It's like watching 5 people argue over who's steering the car while no one notices it's out of fuel. Loud confidence, zero direction. This is where your story quietly diverges from theirs. While they were busy monitoring you, analyzing you, and emotionally budgeting for your failure, you were doing something far less dramatic and far more dangerous to them. You were thinking, adjusting, learning patterns, removing yourself from predictable reactions, not out of fear, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And that's the part no one warns them about. When someone outgrows the role assigned to them, the group doesn't know how to respond. The playbook stops working. The pressure tactics fail. The narratives start contradicting each other. What began as a coordinated effort turns into internal suspicion and quiet blame. So this isn't a story about revenge or domination. It's about what happens when intelligence meets patience, when awareness meets restraint, and when a jealous group realizes, a little too late, that the person they targeted stopped playing the same game long ago. Stay with me. Because what unfolds next isn't loud, dramatic, or cinematic. It's far more unsettling than that. Number 1, you stopped playing the role they assigned to you. At some point you realized something uncomfortable but freeing. The problem was never you as a person. It was the version of you they had already written in their heads. The dependable one. The easy one. The one who reacts, explains, softens things, and absorbs pressure so others don't have to. That role made their lives predictable and their power feel stable. And without making an announcement or a scene, you stopped performing it. That single shift did more damage to their plans than any argument ever could. People who rely on control don't actually study who you are. They study how you behave under pressure. Once you changed that pattern, they lost their leverage. You weren't louder, you weren't colder, you were just no longer available for manipulation. And that confused them. What unsettled them most wasn't resistance, but absence. You didn't rush to correct assumptions. You didn't scramble to defend your intentions. You didn't jump when expectations were silently placed on you. You let awkward pauses exist. You let people sit with their own projections. That's when things started breaking behind the scenes. A jealous group needs consistency from its target. They need you to stay small in familiar ways so their story keeps working. When you stepped out of character, they had to rewrite the script in real time, and that exposed how flimsy it always was. Some tried to provoke you back into the old version. Others grew irritated without knowing why. A few panicked, because without your predictable responses, they couldn't coordinate anymore. This wasn't about becoming distant or detached. It was about becoming intentional. You decided who had access to you, who deserved explanations, and who didn't. That decision alone shifted the balance. You weren't defying them. You were redefining yourself. And here's the quiet truth. Most people aren't prepared for that. They don't know how to deal with someone who no longer plays along but also doesn't fight. Someone who simply outgrows the role and keeps moving. That's when targeting turns into confusion. Confusion turns into mistakes, and mistakes turn inward. You didn't beat them by force. You beat them by refusing to be who they needed you to stay. Number 2, you learned their weakness was coordination, not intelligence. Most people assume that groups targeting someone do so because they're smarter, better prepared, or somehow more capable. That's a trap. The real vulnerability of a jealous group is not their brains, it's their need to work together and their obsession with agreement. They survive on coordination, the unspoken choreography of who says what, who supports whom, who gossips first. Without that, their whole operation collapses. You saw it early. While they were busy checking in with each other, making sure their stories aligned and their resentment stayed consistent, you didn't need approval from anyone. You didn't need a committee to move forward. Every move you made was independent, precise and unnoticeable until it was too late. They were slow, tied down by their own need to be synchronized, while you were agile, free and untouchable. The irony is brutal. People targeting you often believe their collective power comes from intelligence. In reality, it's a fragile scaffolding built on timing, shared assumptions, and emotional consistency. When one person wavers, the entire structure shakes. When one slips, the narrative falls apart. You didn't have to dismantle them. You just refused to be part of their rhythm. Their weakness revealed itself in how loudly they had to coordinate, how often they needed validation from each other, and how desperate they became to keep their plan intact. This realization changes everything. It's no longer about outsmarting them in the traditional sense. It's about exploiting the simple fact that they cannot operate alone. A jealous group relies on others' participation, on the illusion of unanimity, and on everyone buying into the same story. You didn't argue, you didn't expose, you simply moved outside of the group's equation. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, their coordination crumbled. Confusion set in, friction emerged, blame shifted, and what once looked like a united front turned into a quiet mess. Their intelligence never failed them. Their dependence on each other did. Recognizing this subtle vulnerability, the one they never saw in themselves, was the moment you gained a power they could never predict. You didn't just survive. You became untouchable within a system that relied on everyone else playing exactly the same game. Number 3, you didn't expose them. You let them overexpose themselves. One of the most powerful moves you made wasn't an action at all. It was patience. While most people think winning against jealousy requires confrontation, shouting, or revealing hidden truths, the real advantage comes from stepping back and letting the other side reveal everything on their own. People who scheme thrive on secrecy, but they also have a fatal flaw: their need to justify themselves, to be believed, and to coordinate lies. You didn't have to do a thing. They did it for you. They underestimated how easily people can betray themselves when they believe they're untouchable. Every whispered conversation, every over-explained story, every frantic attempt to control perception was a window into their methods, weaknesses, and motivations. While they were busy proving their point, covering their tracks, and maintaining their narrative, you were observing, learning, and positioning yourself without leaving a trace. You didn't attack. You watched, and the information they spilled in their own clumsiness was more powerful than any strategy you could have manufactured. The brilliance of this approach is its subtlety. It doesn't feel like power in the moment. It looks like inaction. That's why it's so effective. People who are jealous assume passivity equals weakness, but in reality, it's a mirror reflecting their incompetence. The more they act, the more they contradict themselves. The more they plot, the more obvious their motives become. All you needed to do was step aside and refuse to participate in the game they thought they were controlling. And eventually cracks appear. People who were once confident start second-guessing each other. Rumors conflict. Lies unravel. Frustration replaces strategy. By the time they realize their cohesion is gone, it's too late. Their overexposure didn't just reveal their intentions, it revealed their inability to sustain them. You didn't have to be loud, confrontational, or dramatic. You let the natural consequences of their behavior do the work for you. And in that quiet, deliberate restraint, you gained clarity, control, and an unshakable advantage. They showed who they were. You just watched and waited. The difference between their collapse and your freedom was the patience to do nothing while they revealed everything. Number 4, you realized envy doesn't want your failure. It wants your place. Most people misunderstand jealousy. They think that when someone resents them, it's because of hatred or a desire to see them fail. That's a superficial reading. The deeper truth is far more revealing. Envy doesn't care if you stumble. It cares about ownership. It wants your position, your recognition, your influence, your life, as if it were theirs. Once you see this clearly, the game changes. You stop reacting defensively and start seeing patterns, motives, and vulnerabilities that were invisible before. The jealous group isn't just attacking you for what you did. They're trying to replace you without earning it. They want to occupy the space you've built, the credibility you've earned, and the attention others give you, all while doing less work, taking fewer risks and hoping no one notices the theft. That's why their attacks feel so personal and so urgent. They're not angry at mistakes. They're angry that you exist in a way they can't replicate. Once you internalize this, you stop taking their behavior personally in the conventional sense. You stop trying to justify yourself or prove your worth. You stop scrambling to fix their perception of you because you understand their goal was never acknowledgement. It was replacement. And that awareness changes everything. Suddenly, every move you make isn't defensive, it's strategic. You build around your strengths, reinforce your boundaries, and quietly make it impossible for them to occupy your place. This realization also explains why jealous groups often self-destruct. Their energy is spent not on building or improving themselves, but on displacing you. The more they chase your position, the more mistakes they make, the more exposure they create, and the more obvious their intentions become. Meanwhile, your focus remains forward, unclouded by their fixation, and your influence quietly grows while their attempts falter. Understanding this truth, that envy is about substitution, not destruction, gives you an enormous advantage. It's not about reacting. It's about observing, protecting your space, and letting their hunger for your place dismantle their cohesion. The moment you stopped competing on their terms, you shifted from target to untouchable. You didn't just survive jealousy, you outmaneuvered it without ever raising a hand. Number 5, you stopped explaining yourself, not out of silence, but out of strategy. One of the most underestimated powers in dealing with jealousy is restraint. When people are targeting you, the first instinct is to justify, clarify, and defend. But you realize that every explanation is a potential weapon for them. Words meant to clarify can be twisted, context can be distorted, and intentions can be reframed into accusations. So instead of responding to every slight, rumor, or provocation, you made a deliberate choice. Only speak when it truly matters, and when you do, make it count. Everything else was left untouched. This approach is counterintuitive for most because it looks like doing nothing. To them, Silence might seem like weakness. They think that if you're not arguing, you're losing. But that's exactly the illusion you want them to believe. By stepping out of their expected cycle of reaction, you stopped giving them leverage. They couldn't predict your next move, and without predictability, their plans began to crumble. The brilliance of strategic silence lies in its patience. You weren't avoiding conflict because you were afraid, and you weren't indifferent. You were deliberate. Every withheld response was a calculated decision to deny them ammunition, to force them into exposure, and to keep your position unassailable. While they were busy constructing narratives around your supposed weakness, you were observing, analyzing, and positioning yourself with clarity they could never anticipate. Over time, this restraint becomes a mirror. The more they push, the more obvious their insecurities, contradictions, and desperation become. They over-explain, they overreach, they contradict themselves. And every unnecessary move they make is a self-inflicted wound that you didn't need to create. By refusing to over-explain, you also reclaimed your energy. Jealous groups feed off emotional reactions. When you refuse to provide them, their strategies collapse. They realize too late that influence isn't about volume or aggression. It's about precision. Your strategic restraint transformed what looked like silence into a form of control. They could neither predict nor counter. You didn't just survive their attacks. You outmaneuvered them quietly, efficiently, and with a patience that made their own efforts irrelevant. Number 6, you understood that groups collapse when incentives change. The most overlooked truth about jealous groups is that their cohesion isn't rooted in loyalty or shared morals. It's rooted in mutual benefit. They stay united because it serves each person's interest in the short term. But the moment those incentives shift, even slightly, cracks appear. People stop cooperating, arguments start surfacing, and alliances begin to fracture. You didn't break them with confrontation or exposure. You simply observed and let reality do the work. Every group thrives on a balance of gain and risk. In a jealous circle, the gain is often the sense of superiority, validation, or perceived control over you. The risk is exposure, mistakes, or social fallout. By refusing to feed into their narrative, by acting independently, and by being strategically unassailable, you subtly altered the equation. Suddenly, the risks outweighed the rewards. Their carefully maintained alliance started wobbling. One person hesitated. Another began questioning motives. Small doubts grew into hesitation, and hesitation is fatal in any group built on resentment. This is where the genius of patience and observation becomes clear. You didn't need to fight. You didn't need to confront. Their own internal logic, when tested by changing conditions, began to unravel. People who were once loud and coordinated became cautious and contradictory. Their unity depended on shared resentment, and once one person saw diminishing value, the chain reaction began. Coordination faltered, blame shifted, and control slipped through their fingers like sand. Understanding this principle gave you an invisible advantage. You weren't just untouchable, you became a catalyst for their collapse without touching a single person. Every attempt they made to regain leverage only highlighted their fragility. What looked like strength was nothing more than a temporary alignment, held together by shallow incentives. By seeing through the illusion, you navigated beyond conflict entirely. You didn't destroy them. You let reality recalibrate itself while you stayed firmly grounded. Their downfall wasn't dramatic or noisy. It was inevitable, because the system they relied on couldn't survive without the incentives that only you controlled indirectly. Your awareness turned their own mechanics against them, quietly but irreversibly. Number 7, you refused to emotionally sponsor their insecurity. One of the most subtle yet devastating advantages you gained was realizing that jealous people survive on emotional fuel, and you stopped providing it. Most targets instinctively react. They get angry, defensive, anxious, or overly explanatory. They invest energy trying to prove themselves or calm the storm. You did the opposite. You understood that their attacks weren't about truth or fairness. They were about feeding their own need for validation, superiority, and attention. Once you stopped giving them that energy, their entire strategy lost momentum. This refusal isn't about being cold or indifferent. It's about being precise. You didn't waste a single thought or word on trying to comfort or reason with people whose goal was displacement, not understanding. Every reaction you withheld, every tension you refused to absorb, forced them to confront themselves. Their frustration, confusion, and internal pressure intensified, and they had nobody else to blame. Suddenly, the emotional economy they relied on began collapsing. The more you disengaged emotionally, the louder their instability became. People targeting you expect resistance, justification, or fear. They count on it. That's the predictable part they rely on. When you refuse to participate in their emotional ecosystem, they overcompensated. They overexplained, overreacted, and overreached. Every attempt to provoke a response exposed their desperation and insecurity rather than yours. This also gave you clarity and control. Energy spent managing someone else's jealousy is energy wasted. By refusing to sponsor their insecurity, you preserved focus for your own growth, strategy, and positioning. You weren't just neutral, you were untouchable in the sense that their attacks no longer mattered beyond the surface. Their frustration became a mirror reflecting their own weaknesses, while your stability became the silent engine driving your advantage. In the end, jealousy cannot thrive without willing participants, and you removed yourself from the equation. You didn't fight fire with fire. You simply withheld the oxygen they needed to burn. By doing so, you became untouchable, not because you were stronger, but because you refused to play the game they depended on. Their insecurity fed itself, and you quietly walked away, leaving them exposed, frantic, and impotent. Number 8, you played the long game while they chased short-term dominance. Most jealous groups operate on urgency. They want immediate results, to humiliate, to dominate, to make themselves feel superior in the moment. Their attacks are loud, reactionary, and desperate. They confuse speed with strength, volume with power. You, however, understood that real influence and security aren't about winning the moment. They're about shaping the conditions that ensure consistent advantage over time. While they were scrambling for quick wins, you were positioning yourself for lasting dominance. The beauty of the long game is that it's invisible. You didn't need to react to every rumor, every slight, or every attempt to provoke you. You didn't need to match their energy or prove anything to anyone. Instead, you focused on strategy that compounded silently, building credibility, strengthening alliances that mattered, protecting your boundaries, and learning patterns that would serve you later. By the time they noticed the shift, the momentum had already moved firmly in your favor. Chasing immediate results forces people to make mistakes. Jealous groups are no exception. Their urgency leads to overexposure, miscommunication, and contradictions. Every short-sighted action becomes a piece of evidence against them. They believe their aggression is a display of control, but from a distance, it's chaos disguised as coordination. You recognize this and let it unfold naturally, never intervening unnecessarily, letting their impatience become their weakness. Playing the long game also changes your psychology. While they burned energy on anger, envy, and projection, you invested energy in clarity, self-discipline, and foresight. Their wins were temporary and shallow. Your gains were structural and enduring. They couldn't match your patience because they were trapped in the illusion of instant gratification and visible dominance. Eventually, the difference becomes undeniable. Their short-term victories look loud but fleeting, while your steady, silent progress leaves them scrambling and confused. By the time they realize the real balance of power has shifted, it's too late. They can't catch up because you weren't racing, you were building. And that's why long-term strategy always beats short-term aggression, leaving you untouchable while they burn themselves out chasing illusions. Number 9. You didn't underestimate them, you overestimated consequences. One of the most overlooked advantages you had was taking every potential move seriously, not because you feared it, but because you respected its possible impact. People targeting you often assume you will underestimate them, thinking that carelessness is the natural outcome of confidence. They bank on shortcuts, misjudgments, and casual reactions. You, however, flipped that script. You didn't just anticipate their actions. You considered their fallout, the ripple effects, and the consequences that even they might not foresee. That level of foresight put you several steps ahead. Overestimating consequences isn't about paranoia. It's about responsibility, understanding that even small actions can escalate, even minor attacks can leave traces, and even subtle manipulations can spiral into chaos. By treating every move with weight, you forced them to operate in a more constrained, cautious way, while you maintained freedom through clarity. Their overconfidence met your calculated patience, and the imbalance became apparent. This approach also revealed their mistakes faster. When you assume that every action has consequences, you notice inconsistencies, gaps in logic, and overextensions immediately. What they thought were clever maneuvers became glaring errors under your scrutiny. Every time they tried to outmaneuver you, they were unknowingly playing a game with a referee who already knew the final score. Overestimation also gave you leverage. While they rushed, reckless and impatient, you moved deliberately, prepared for all eventualities. You didn't react to them emotionally, and you didn't create openings through negligence. Their miscalculations accumulated, while your foresight turned potential threats into predictable patterns. In essence, their aggression became a map showing exactly where their vulnerabilities lay. By overestimating consequences, you transformed caution into a silent form of power. You weren't just avoiding traps. You were converting their energy into intelligence. Their frustration, missteps, and desperation became tools for you, and every move they made tightened the net around themselves. In the end, while they thought they were testing you, it was you who was quietly testing them and passing every trial with precision. Number 10. You stopped trying to be understood by people invested in misunderstanding you. One of the most liberating shifts you made wasn't strategic in the conventional sense. It was psychological. You realized that some people don't want truth, clarity, or understanding. They want narratives that serve their insecurities, agendas, or jealousy. Once you accepted this, you stopped wasting energy trying to justify yourself to those who would twist every word, action, or silence to fit their story. That single decision changed the balance entirely. People who are invested in misunderstanding you are predictable in one key way. They will never see you accurately. No matter how carefully you explain, how patiently you respond, or how clearly you outline your intentions, their filter of resentment distorts reality. Every effort to communicate becomes ammunition for them, not insight for you. By trying to be understood, you were giving them fuel to control perception, to validate their narrative, and to maintain power over your life. Recognizing that, you withdrew the energy entirely. This is where your power quietly escalated. Once you stopped catering to their need to misinterpret, they were forced to operate without your compliance. Their assumptions had no reinforcement. Their projections met a wall. That absence of engagement created dissonance in the group, confusion in coordination, and cracks in confidence. They couldn't predict you, manipulate you, or rely on your reactions. Your independence became destabilizing to them. Another layer of advantage is that withdrawing the need to be understood sharpens focus. You no longer measured success by their perception of you, but by your own alignment and forward movement. Energy spent defending yourself, convincing the doubters, or correcting the record was redirected into strengthening your position, expanding influence, and solidifying clarity. Meanwhile, their obsession with misunderstanding only deepened their mistakes. By letting go of the expectation to be seen as they wanted, you forced the group to face the consequences of their own insecurities. You didn't attack, you didn't argue, you simply stepped outside their illusion. And that step, subtle as it seems, turned you from target to untouchable, leaving them scrambling in a narrative that only they could believe. Number 11. You noticed envy gets louder right before it collapses. Jealousy has a rhythm, and the louder it becomes, the closer it is to breaking. You observed this early on. People targeting you often escalate their behavior. Louder accusations, more frequent attacks, frantic gossip, desperate positioning. Not because they are stronger, but because they are unraveling. Their volume is a signal, not a threat. While others might panic, you understood that noise often precedes collapse. The more they tried to assert control, the more obvious their desperation became. This loudness is a self-revealing mechanism. When someone is genuinely confident, they don't need to shout. They don't need to rally others around minor grievances or keep reiterating their point. But jealousy thrives on performance. It needs witnesses, reinforcements, and constant validation. That's why, as a group targeting you grows more agitated, it's a sign of internal instability. Each overreaction, each repeated accusation, each hurried move exposes the cracks they've been trying to hide. Your advantage came from recognizing the pattern and refusing to feed into it. While they escalated, you maintained consistency, patience, and observation. You didn't engage in the performance they craved, and that made their noise meaningless. Their frantic attempts to manipulate perception only revealed more of their weaknesses. Every dramatic move they made amplified their own instability. This also gave you insight into timing. You learned that intervention isn't about reacting to the loudest moment. It's about knowing when the storm has exhausted itself, when the panic has fractured coordination, and when their own escalation has created openings. The louder they grow, the more you see the precise moment to act or consolidate without ever needing to shout back. By noticing that envy reaches its peak just before collapse, you gained a predictive advantage. Their noise became a map, their desperation a guide. You didn't need to force their downfall. Their escalating behavior engineered it for you. In remaining calm, strategic, and untouchable amidst the chaos, you let their loudness expose them fully, turning their attempts at dominance into a quiet, inevitable unraveling. Number 12. You became costly to interfere with. One of the most powerful shifts in dealing with a jealous group wasn't about confrontation, cleverness, or even exposure. It was about becoming inconvenient, strategically, quietly, and irreversibly. People who target others rely on ease. They want to expend minimal effort for maximum control, expecting predictable reactions and manageable opposition. The moment you changed that dynamic, you became a problem they couldn't ignore, but also couldn't handle without risk. You didn't have to attack. You just raised the stakes for anyone trying to interfere. Being costly doesn't mean intimidating or aggressive. It means making interference require energy, calculation, and risk. Every attempt to manipulate, provoke, or control you demanded precision, timing, and effort, all things they weren't prepared to commit. They had assumed you were a passive target, a puzzle that could be solved with noise and coordination. Instead, you turned into a moving target with invisible boundaries, unpredictable patterns, and unshakable stability. Their usual shortcuts failed, their assumptions crumbled, and suddenly, every action against you carried potential consequences for them. This strategy also shifted perception. When someone becomes costly to deal with, others notice. Allies begin to recognize competence and foresight. Enemies begin to hesitate. What they once dismissed as manageable suddenly feels like liability. The group targeting you cannot sustain aggression against someone whose every move is calculated and whose presence demands attention. Their energy now works against them. Their attempts to regain leverage create more mistakes, contradictions, and exposure. And the brilliance of this approach is subtlety. You weren't loud, and you didn't need to claim power. The cost was inherent in your clarity, restraint, and positioning. It wasn't about them fearing you. It was about them realizing that engaging with you required more effort than it was worth. That shift alone dismantled control quietly but completely. By becoming costly, you didn't just protect yourself. You made it inconvenient, risky, and self-defeating for anyone to continue targeting you. Their own designs began to collapse under the weight of your deliberate inaccessibility. Number 13. You didn't celebrate their downfall. You were already elsewhere. One of the quietest yet most powerful advantages you gained was detachment. When the cracks appeared, when their schemes began to fail, and when the chaos they created finally turned against them, you weren't standing there applauding. You weren't waiting for acknowledgement or savoring their mistakes. You had already moved beyond the battlefield they thought they controlled. This isn't indifference, it's strategic transcendence. While they were still consumed by their own plotting and resentment, you were building, growing, and positioning yourself far beyond their reach. Most people believe victory is measured by witnessing the other side's collapse, by seeing them stumble and finally paying the price. That's the narrative jealousy wants you to buy into. It thrives on reaction, on drama, on validation through visible defeat. You understood that the real win doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need applause or commentary. The win is the freedom to continue your path, untouched and unshaken, while they scramble in the aftermath of their own errors. By already being elsewhere, you removed yourself from their power entirely. Their mistakes no longer affected you emotionally, socially, or strategically. The energy they spent attempting to manipulate, provoke, or undermine you had no leverage. You had reclaimed time, focus, and influence that they could not reach, leaving them isolated in a narrative they thought would ensnare you. Their downfall became a consequence of their own choices, not of your retaliation, and that made it unstoppable. This detachment also sends a subtle message without words. Control is internal, not external. You don't need to dominate, expose, or confront to succeed. You simply continue forward while the chaos they created consumes them. Their collapse becomes irrelevant to you because you are no longer bound to their expectations or dramas. In essence, your greatest triumph was not in their defeat, but in your refusal to let their actions dictate your life. You had already moved to a place where their influence couldn't reach, where their schemes couldn't bind you, and where your focus remained entirely on growth, clarity, and freedom. You won quietly, profoundly, and irreversibly. And number 14, you learned that outsmarting enemies often looks boring from the outside. One of the hardest truths to grasp, and one of the most effective, is that real strategy rarely resembles drama. Outsiders expect victories to be flashy, confrontations to be loud, and revenge to be spectacular. But the way you outsmarted your enemies was quiet, deliberate, and almost invisible. From the outside, it might have looked like patience, inaction, or even indifference. That's exactly why it worked. Real power doesn't need an audience, and real control doesn't announce itself. The brilliance of this approach lies in its subtlety. Every move you made was calculated, precise, and unhurried. You weren't reacting emotionally or trying to prove yourself. You were observing patterns, understanding weaknesses, and positioning yourself where their influence couldn't reach. While they were busy performing for attention, gossiping, coordinating attacks, or seeking validation, you were building resilience, credibility, and strategic advantage. Their energy was loud, visible, and expendable. Yours was silent, invisible, and compounding. What makes this method so devastating is how it disrupts expectations. People targeting you were counting on drama, mistakes, and reactive behavior. They expected that inaction would be weakness, that patience would be dull, and that silence would invite attack. Instead, every attempt to manipulate, provoke, or corner you only highlighted their own errors. Their frustration grew, their coordination faltered, and their plans unraveled, all while you maintained the same consistent, unshakable course. Being boring on the outside doesn't mean being passive. It means prioritizing outcomes over appearances, strategy over emotion, and long-term advantage over instant gratification. It's about understanding that influence, power, and freedom rarely need spectacle to succeed. By the time their schemes collapsed, you were far ahead, unaffected by the chaos, and untouched by their attempts to control your path. Outsmarting enemies isn't about noise, flash, or drama. It's about patience, awareness, and silent, relentless execution. What looks boring from the outside is often the most unstoppable force at work, quietly dismantling opposition and securing victory that no one else even notices until it's complete. What all of this reveals is a truth most people overlook. True power isn't loud, flashy, or reactive. It's quiet, calculated, and invisible to those too consumed by their own agendas to see it. Outsmarting enemies isn't about revenge, confrontation, or dramatic victories. It's about understanding patterns, preserving your energy, positioning yourself strategically, and refusing to feed the chaos that others thrive on. You don't win by fighting their game. You win by refusing to play it and letting their own weaknesses unravel them. From stepping out of the role they assigned you, to exploiting the fragility of their coordination, to letting their desperation expose them, every move was deliberate. You protected your energy, maintained clarity, and strengthened your position while they burned theirs in noise, fear, and overreach. You didn't react to envy, you observed it. You didn't chase drama, you built leverage. You didn't wait for their downfall to celebrate. You were already ahead, untouchable and unshakable. This is the art of strategic mastery, recognizing that patience, restraint, and awareness are far more powerful than aggression, anger, or immediate gratification. By understanding their motives, overestimating consequences, and refusing to participate in their illusions, you didn't just survive. You rose above them. Their chaos became your guide, their mistakes became your advantage, and their envy became irrelevant because you operated on a higher plane of insight and control. If this breakdown helped you see the invisible dynamics of power and strategy, make sure you stay connected. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the insights that give you the edge. Like this video if it resonated, share it with someone who needs to understand the quiet art of outsmarting challenges, and drop a comment to share your thoughts or experiences. Every action you take here strengthens your awareness, just like the strategies we explored, because being untouchable isn't luck. It's knowing how to play the game smarter than anyone else. Stay blessed always.